Members of the committee, this morning we are going to commence our deliberations by examining the appropriations to the Deputy Governor. But I note our intention really is to try and get through the remainder of the examination of all appropriations that remain. And there are a number of smaller appropriations that traditionally and particularly don't, members have not questioned or have questions on. So I was going to crave the indulgence of the opposition members if they might indicate. Let me just start first. If they have any questions on the Oversight Committee of the Legislative Assembly that they think they might have. If not, then what I would like to do is put it to a vote and let's just get it out of the way and focus on what remains to be discussed and where you have questions. Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Chairman, we would prefer to deal with it as we get to it, as opposed to trying to take it out now, because when we're doing one ministry, that may lead to questions to be asked about one of those small areas that might come up. So we would prefer to deal with them in order, and we'll tell it when we don't have any questions.
Okay.
But I wouldn't want to
proceed as we
do some stuff and then we regret it because answers from one member government might lead us to want to question that area. That's all.
That's fine. We begin then with the appropriations to the Deputy Governor. CIV 1, Policy Advice to the Head of the Civil Service, $1,234,181 in 2018 and $1,184,169 in 2019. Are there any questions? Member for Bodentown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through you, sir, to the Honorable Deputy Governor. With regards to rollover within the civil service, I've noticed in the past there was a trend where prior to the rollover law being removed, that some individuals from the private sector, when they were close to reaching year 5, year 6, applying for jobs within the civil service to get around the rollover system and then stay long enough to get PR. And I'm trying to determine what exactly is the government policy now, especially. I think it's you can just correct me, I think the caregiver law, I think they have to be in that position for 3 years prior to even applying for the exemption. Is there a set policy within the government with regards to people from the private sector moving into government and then staying long enough to apply for PR? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, good morning. Franz Manderson, Deputy Governor and Head of the Civil Service. Mr. Chairman, we had for some time, a matter of fact, from when the term limit provisions of the immigration law was passed, I think that was 2004, 2005, or maybe even before, the Civil Service put in place a policy that said that if someone from the private sector was going to join the Civil Service within 2 years, I believe, of their term limit date, that required special permission, because we didn't want, as the member said, for people in the private sector to be jumping into the civil service to avoid the term limit provisions of the immigration law. That policy is still in effect. I think I'm actually glad that the member raised it, so I think it's something that we need to revisit again now that the term limit provisions of the immigration law has changed, where everybody now gets to the sort of year 8 or every year 8, and it can apply for permanent residents. So I thank the member for highlighting it. I do believe there are policies that deter it, but I think it's the right time for us to review that now, given that we have new provisions in the immigration law about term limits.
Okay. Thank you. Members of the committee, just for your knowledge, the appropriations can be found on page 253 of the plan and estimates. Member from East End.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I mean, Mr. Chairman, would the Deputy Governor choose to elaborate on a review of that now?
Well, yes, Mr. Chairman, through you. Mr. Chairman, as you know, when the term limit provisions of the law came in, it basically said that persons had to be key employees before they could graduate on to become to applying for permanent residence. That is not the case right now. Everybody gets to that particular date and then can apply for permanent residence. So we would need to look at the rules that we have in place to deter persons who are simply coming into the civil service to avoid the term limit provisions of the law. So we need to look at the policy that we have in place and make sure that it's fit for purpose now, given the new changes that we've had in the immigration law.
But, Mr. Chairman, if I may, fit for purpose in what way? Because whilst we don't have the specific rollover policy, there is a provision in law which brings your term in this country to a halt, not necessarily a screeching halt, but certainly you are restricted by virtue of certain criterias by law you have to reach to be able to stay in a longer. What difference does it make now to that policy? Because certainly, I don't know, Mr. Chairman, how the Deputy Governor views this, but if you find someone who knows they have not met that criteria and get the opportunity to go into government, it prolongs their stay far and beyond the 8, 9, even if it's 10 years and the legs. And there's no need to go and do that, or that may be the thought process. So I don't understand, and I'm trying, Mr. Chairman, to find out the mindset of the reasons for reviewing this policy, which says 2 years prior to your term limit, because there is a term limit in place, albeit not as abrupt as it previously was.
Yeah. Mr. Chairman, through you, and that's exactly right. So I'm not disagreeing with anything that the member is saying. All I'm saying is that we had a policy in place when the law said one thing. The law now says something else. I now want to make sure that the law that we have, the policy that we have in place is still achieving what it was set out to achieve, which is that person should not be allowed to avoid the term limit provisions of the immigration law by coming into the civil service. I think we want the same thing, sir. That I'm not disagreeing with what the member is saying at all.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, I accept that, but I just was not properly, I wasn't getting that from his substantive answer. Mr. Chairman, there has been a number of times we have discussed the matter of the employment of overseas people, let me call them that, who come to join the service, be it in the armed services or protective services or otherwise. And the provisions, there are no provisions really for the employment of or the removal of people from the civil service. We discussed that during 2013 as well, when those teleps was the matter, or it was the subject of the day, i.e., the civil servants do not fall under that statute, because provisions are made in the Constitution that if you're employed there, you can. It's at the pleasure of Her Majesty, quote unquote, the governor. We continue to see, and this was the discussion, we continue to see people joining our police force and what have you. They stay long enough and eventually get residency or what have you, a change of status for security. and then they leave the police force. We give them the opportunity to go do law, and they leave the police force, and the first thing they become is compliance officers in the law firms. I will not go into what is currently going on and how I believe that was leaked, but anyway, we discussed putting personnel like police officers on particular conditions that you cannot leave the police force. If you want to go back home, then you go back home. But if we spend our money on you, we expect to get value for money. We have had this discussion for a long time. I wonder if the Deputy Governor, Mr. Chairman, could explain to us what the status of that now.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Mr. Chairman, the Chief Officer in charge of the Portfolio Civil Service is doing some work on that right now, and I will ask her to update the committee with your permission.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just an answer to the question regarding the concern about...
I just ask you to give us your name and position, please. Thank you.
Of course. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Gloria McPhail-Nixon, Chief Officer for the Portfolio of the Civil Service. In response to the question that was just asked, Mr. Chairman, I would say that as recently as this past week, there's been communication between myself and the RCIPS. They have been looking at their contract terms, the specific contracts that are offered to police officers because of concerns that they have had about the practices which the member raises. Members who have been recruited typically from overseas and who break their contract terms in order to take up employment locally. We are working with them, advising on the contract, but we are also speaking about broader issues of retention within the RCIPS with the Commissioner of Police and his management team. So I can tell you that it is a matter that is under active research and work right now by the Commissioner of Police and his team, assisted by the POCS.
Mr. Chairman, let me say, sir, that I thank the Deputy Governor's Chief Officer for that answer. Mr. Chairman, I use police department as an example. This, should I say, permeates the whole civil service. It's not police alone. We see it more prominent, more visible, should I say, in the police department, because we're constantly rolling over, pardon the pun, but we constantly having problem with retention of contracted police officers. That's why we see it so much, and it's in your face. But it's not only there. And, you know, human rights or not, Mr. Chairman, the fact is that if you are recruited to do a particular job, that's what you should do. And it's obvious. Many of those that leave, we have spent hard-earned Cayman Islands residents, legally resident and Cayman dollars on to send them to law school, send them overseas, and then they leave our police force and we don't get the benefit of it, or the fire service, or wherever it is. It may be the prison service as well. And those are the concerns. So it's not only the police force. I trust that the Deputy Governor, Mr. Chairman, will look into it from a broader perspective.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I will certainly be happy to give that undertaking to the member.
Mr. Chairman, I just had one other thing. I don't know if I want to discuss a particular matter that came up recently in Finance Committee, and it surrounds surrounds the CMO at the hospital. But I do know that there is a reform section budget here, civil service reform budget, that I don't know if the deputy governor would be better placed to receive those questions under that. I will.
Mr. Chairman, no is fine. I don't have any issues, sir.
But Mr. Chairman, certainly if there are others who wants to go to a different thing, then
I'll
easy with that.
ask you to give way to the member for Georgetown, then we'll come back to you, sir. Member for Georgetown.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a follow-up on the member of East End's question, and through you, Mr. Chair, to Deputy Governor. Obviously, I'm glad to hear that your office is maintaining a close eye on persons who may just want to join the civil service for the purposes of the grant of PR or status later on. But I can imagine that that must be a very hard process to police, because of the fact is, how can you know what is in a person's mind? Do you have any ways or ideas of being able to identify any legal tricks, so to speak, to get around that process? Because I can't see how you can stop a person that wants to apply to, say, for instance, the department that's being talked about right now is the police department at year 6. Get successful with the job, but how do you know that that person has only done that so they can get the PR or later on the status? Do you have any ideas? Have you discussed it?
Mr. Chairman, thank you, through you. Mr. Chairman, the member raises an excellent point, and as I mentioned, it was easier before when there was a cutoff of the 7 years, because we could simply say, if you if you have 2 years left to go on your term limit, you are not allowed to join the civil service. Now we can do the same thing here, whereas now 8 years or 9 years, and we can say that we are not going to have anyone joining the civil service who has 2 years left to go on their term limit. So that is one thing, because as the member said, we really can't, Mr. Chairman, look in people's minds and see what their intentions are. So we have to do some work around that. The one thing that we can do is to ensure that people whose permanent residence has been denied is then not coming into the civil service, because then that would be really going against the immigration law. So those are the two things that we will focus on, possibly looking at the limit and raising that, and also then making sure the persons whose PR has been denied is not coming into the civil service. But for most part, Mr. Chairman, I haven't had this issue raised with me for quite a while, so I don't believe it's a big issue, but I do thank the members for raising it. It is something that we need to keep in the forefront of our minds.
Just a quick follow-up through you, Mr. Chair, and this is the last question in respect to it. Am I understanding it is a current policy now, or going to be in respect to a person who's been denied PR not being able to apply to the civil service?
Mr. Chairman, through you, to my best of my recollection, that policy is in place now. And I'm certain that the policy about the time limit is there now as well. So we will review it, and happy to share that policy with members once we get it completed.
Mr. Chairman. Member for Buddentown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through you, sir, to the Honorable Deputy Governor. With regards to the Public Authorities Bill, what has been the impact now, or the policing of it, or the enforcement of it, or the compliance with it since it has been passed? And my second question, well, no, it can wait. I'll wait till the order ending for that question, but the Public Authorities Bill, sorry.
Yeah. Mr. Chairman, through you, thank you. Mr. Chairman, the Public Authorities Bill did come into effect, I believe, on the 1st of June. There was one particular provision that we didn't think we were ready to put in place. That was the developing a salary scale for the entire public authorities. So that has been delayed until we could do a lot more consultation and come up with a scheme that we can present. So that is now being looked at. I think we talked about that coming in early or mid next year. My role is very limited in the public authorities. The role of the public authorities bill was to give ministers and their chief officers a bit more autonomy over the SAGCs. I have the authority to, send in HR audit or different things like that, along with chief officers. I do know that chief officers have been engaging with the CEOs of the statutory authorities to remind them about their obligations under the law. And I am aware that one board, the HSA board, asked for a presentation on the public authorities bill, which my office delivered.
Member for West Bay, you have questions?
Mr. Chairman, through you, has there, to the Deputy Governor, with the advent of so many young professional Caymanians coming back home, ready to take up post, has there been any thought given to also putting the same rollover policies in the private sector to the government, to the civil service?
Mr. Chairman, thank you, through you. Yes, Mr. Chairman, that is something that we have actually has been talked about for quite a while. The Portfolio Civil Service did some work around it. It is not an easy thing to do. I just want to put on record that I am not against it. I do believe that we should have similar rules in the public sector as we do in the private sector. However, when you look at where our foreign nationals are in the civil service, they are in education, teachers, they are in the police, they are in prison, they are in children and family services, they are in the judicial sections, auditors. So we don't have a lot of what I would, as the member is saying, people coming back who want to take up jobs. I don't think we have a lot of, well, I know we don't have a lot of foreign nationals in those mid-management positions, supervisory positions. Those are now held by Caymanians. So we would have to look very carefully, Mr. Chairman, to see how would that impact the civil service. You have to be very careful about this. We could end up with a situation where, if it's not carefully done, in a year's time, half your teachers have to leave, or half your policemen have to leave, or half your prison officers have to leave. But the member is right to raise it. I want to thank him for that. It is something that I think we need to do some more work on to ensure that it works well for us. And when I say us, I mean civil service, the public service, and the public, and, as the member said, young Caymanians coming in. We want to make sure that we're doing everything possible to give our young people, our young graduates coming in, opportunities to come into their civil service. Nothing gives us more pleasure as seeing some of our young people coming back and joining the civil service.
Member from East End. Oh, member from Northside, you had a question?
Actually, Mr. Chairman, I can leave my questions until CIV 2 because I want to include the whole public service in the questions that I have to ask concerning the public authorities law.
Back to you, member for East End.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
If you're happy to
The member from Georgetown.
Oh, go ahead, member for Georgetown.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks to the member from East End. Through you, Mr. Chair, the Deputy Governor has said that the Public Authorities Law has come into effect 1st of June. And if I recall, based on the deliberations of this Honorable House in the last administration, much of the discussion was to get the authorities in line with the pay scale of the civil service. So the law is in effect now, and ultimately what you're saying is the pay scale part of it has been pushed back?
Mr. Chairman, there are still certain things under the Public Authorities Law that is required. But yes, the section that says that there should be a pay scale should be developed has not come into effect, because that's a huge, big piece of work that would have to be done. We couldn't rush that in. There has to be assessments. There have to be proper evaluations done to make sure that what we're putting in place works for our SAGCs. We have authorities like SEMA and other regulatory bodies who are saying that they're having difficulty, getting in some of the top talent that is needed. So we don't want to put things in place that will, compromise their ability. But the law does have other safeguards in it that are in place now that deal with remuneration, etc.
Through you, Mr. Chair, following up. I would agree your assessment in respect to making sure that that process is done. But has there been any new hires in respect to authorities since the law has come into effect that maybe your office would say, until we get this money part, salary part under control with a proper assessment of the pay scale, that we put them on a temporary contract until that's resolved? Because one of the main factors in changing the public authorities law is to get under control the amount of money being paid to these authorities.
Mr. Chairman, thank you, and through you. I think that was one of the key issues. I don't think that was the issue, but yes, we wanted to ensure that the government and the public was receiving value for money. But there are other provisions in the law right now. Sorry, I've just been handed the law. I'm just going through it here. That talks about what are some of the requirements now that if there was going to be a new hire, for example, if there was going to be a new hire at the CEO level, there are provisions there that says that there has to be consultation with the minister, consultation with the chief officer. The chief officer should sit on the panel. All those things, those safeguards are there now to address some of the concerns that you're saying.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And through you again, in respect to any new hires, which I hope that you can list shortly, has that process been done with each of those new hires since June the 1st?
Mr. Chairman, that is sort of outside of my remit. I do not have authority over the SAGCs. They report into the relevant minister and chief officer. I'm not sure that they can hold me accountable for that.
Okay, Mr. Chair. Through you again, Mr. Chair, I think what I understood just now was they also have to go to the civil service civil service head who's in charge of the HR matters of the civil service to be on the panel in that discussion. Is that what I understood just now? Through you, Mr. Chair?
Mr. Chair, sorry, could you just repeat that again, sir?
What I understood just now, through you, Mr. Chair, is that in that hiring process, consultation will have to be done with the minister, as well as the chief officer who's dealing with the HR matters. And in this case, it would be the lovely Miss Gloria Macfield-Nixon. Am I correct?
Mr. Chairman, if there was a vacancy in one of the SAGCs that fall under my office, and there's only one, the Civil Aviation Authority and the Pensions Board, then that provisions would apply. But Mr. Chairman, if I could, with your permission, just read out what it says here. It is Part 4, Appointment and Responsibilities of Chief Executive Officers of Public Authorities. Where there's a vacancy or an impending vacancy in the position of a Chief Executive Officer, a board shall, prior to the recruitment, inform the minister or official member who has responsibility for the public authority of the vacancy. Before advertising the vacancy, prepare a job description which sets out the duties and responsibilities, skills. I'm just paraphrasing, Mr. Chairman. C, submit the job description to the portfolio of the civil service, which shall evaluate the job description using the same job evaluation scheme used for civil servants and allocate a salary for the post, operate an open and fair recruitment process, and publicly advertise in any media the vacancy in such manner as enable suitably qualified persons to apply for the position, and then it goes into details about what the ad should look like.
Okay, Mr. Chair. Can you follow up by reading into the record what that would look like, please? Through you,
Mr. Chairman,
Chair.
absolutely. Mr. Chairman, the same section, the advertisement shall include a summary of the duties, the skills, and attributes required of applicants, the salary range, including any performance bonuses, the conditions of service, the information to be provided by applicants, the authority to which applicants are to be submitted, and the closing date and time of applications, and the period between the date of the first advertisement and the closing date for applications shall be no less than 14 days.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, just two more follow-up questions. Can you say whether that process has been done with all new hires since June 1st? And the statutory authorities?
Yeah. Mr. Chairman, I'm not sure, sir. I don't know.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, can we have the Deputy Governor confirm that his chief officer in his ministry was a representative on the interview panel for the recent hires at the Stock Exchange?
Mr. Chairman, I spoke to the chief officer, and he was not part of the interview panel.
But it should also include the chief officer of the Ministry of the portfolio of the Civil Service as part of the panel.
Mr. Chairman, my understanding of the Public Authorities Bill is that the interview panel shall include the chief officer of the ministry or portfolio concerned or the appointing representative of the chief officer. That's in section 26(3). So my read of that, it would be if Mr. Richard Smith was we were recruiting for that position at Airports Authority, then Civil Aviation Authority, I would then, Ms. Gloria McField-Nixon in my portfolio was sitting on the panel.
Can you confirm? Can you confirm that Section 25C was complied by, whereas the portfolio of the Civil Service was involved in the job evaluation? Because as I understand it, in the application and enforcement of the Public Authorities Law, for existing positions, existing salaries, kind of remain, I think we used to use the term whereby called personal to holder. But in the cases where it was for a renewal of a contract for a Caymanian heading up one of the SACGs, all of this would not necessarily apply. But it certainly should all apply when you're hiring somebody different, a new person. And then Section 25, 26, and 27 should come into force. And the question I'm asking is, can you confirm then that the chief officer of the ministry responsible did in fact refer to the portfolio of the Civil Service for the requirements of 25C?
Mr. Chairman, I just had a chat, just checked with Ms. McField-Nixon. She has confirmed that the job description was not submitted to the portfolio civil service. Right. Sorry, Mr. Chairman, I didn't get the part B of the question.
No, that was it, because that section also requires in the evaluation of that job description, right, that the salary for the position be reviewed and allocated under the same section, separate and apart from the section in the law that lays out scales of salaries for, which is the part that's not enforced. But certainly this part of the law is enforced.
It is.
So the question is, what happens in a situation when this law is abridged by a chief officer and by a board And by ministers too, yeah.
Yeah.
Does that question the legality or the authenticity of the contract? No, not.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I think what I would want to focus on is what the law says. So section 25, it says, where there is a vacancy or an impending vacancy in the position of a chief executive officer, a board shall. So it says that the board shall do all of these things, inform the minister or official member, make sure that the chief officer is there. Mr. Chairman, I did check with my chief officer, who was traveling at the time when that appointment was made, and he certainly advised me that he was not part of the interview panel. Now, what my next step would be to then officially inform the minister responsible and hand it over to the minister, because obviously the board has not carried out their responsibilities here, it would seem to me.
The minister's president, I don't know if the Minister of Financial Services, which is where I believe the responsibility for that particular board falls, would care to answer as to whether she was consulted by the board and why the board was not obligated to follow the law.
Mr. Chair, there was no formal consultation process that took place with me. My chief officer, I would need to ask whether or not there was any involvement with him. I can't answer to that. As the Deputy Governor said, we actually were overseas on business at the time. However, there may have been some communication between himself and the board prior to the recruitment process, etc. So obviously I can't answer to that. I was apprised of the fact that an offer had been made, but that was the extent of the consultation at that point. With me, that is.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, sir, we have a situation. I mean, what they say? Houston, what? We have a problem. I mean, Mr. Chairman, this law, and Mr. Chairman, I will not question the authenticity of the utterances of the Deputy Governor, but he says the only part of this law that is not enacted right now is setting the salary scales. And that's just one little subsection. But what he didn't read, Mr. Chairman, was 24, Section 24 in its entirety. And may I, sir, a public authority shall have a chief executive officer by whatever name called, who, notwithstanding any other law, shall, A, be appointed by the board after consultation with the responsible minister or official member, i.e. the official member, the Deputy Governor, and the Attorney General. B, be a non-voting member of the board. Now, if this statute has been enacted by the signing of the Secretary of State, i.e. through the Governor, why wasn't that done? Because, Mr. Chairman, we have the minister who's responsible and knows nothing of this matter. The minister, it says, consultation with the responsible minister or official member, and we are hearing a minister who has constitutional responsibility under this set of papers, constitutional responsibility, said She has no knowledge of it? Really?
Mr. Chair, let me just, before we go off on a misunderstanding, what I said was that I had been apprised by my chief officer that an offer had been made to appoint. That is what I said. So to say that I was completely unaware is not accurate. What I was told was that an offer had been made and was on the table for the hiring of that position. That was the extent of my involvement in the process.
Mr.
Now,
Chairman.
as I said, the chief officer himself may have had other interaction with the board on this particular matter. But as it relates to my involvement, the apprising me of the situation did actually occur, I believe, prior to the actual appointment being finalized.
Mr. Chairman, with all due respect to the minister, and I'm not trying to be disrespectful to her, the chief officer has no constitutional responsibility in this country, none. You don't find them in here. It says ministers. And subsequently, the laws, statutes are enacted in accordance with the Constitution. And the responsibility is the ministers. It has nothing, absolutely nothing to do with the chief officer. The law does not say that the chief officer has to be consulted. It is said that all appointments can only be done after consultation with the minister or the official member responsible to this constitution. Chief officer has nothing to do with it, and that is unfortunate. Somebody needs to find out what went wrong.
Member from Northside, you had a question?
Yeah, yes, through you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, is the Minister of Financial Services evidence before this committee is that no official communication came from the board to you about the hiring of the chief executive officer prior to, because all of this is supposed to be done prior to the position being advertised, prior to the position of a recruitment panel, prior to the position to the person being given an offer.
Mr. Chair, to my recollection, the answer is no. But I will ask that whatever the correspondence that I may have received will be checked to ensure that that is in fact the case. But as per my recollection, the answer is no.
Mr. Chair.
Member from Georgetown.
Through you, Mr. Chair, to the Deputy Governor, in respect to the delay of the structuring of the pay scale for the authorities, would it not be a good idea, simply on the basis that the majority of the new public authorities law was based on trying to scale in the money amounts that we pay out, because that was the emphasis, the genesis of why we made the change. So much salaries being paid out that were way more above than what the civil service was getting. Would it not make sense that until we get that scale sorted out, that we would have had temporary contracts given until we get to that stage?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Through you. Mr. Chairman, just a slight disagreement with what the member is saying. I don't want to agree that the main purpose of this bill was to reel in salaries. One of the main purposes of the bill was to improve the governance of the SAGCs. That was which is what we're talking about right now. But Mr. Chairman, I'd be happy to pass on that suggestion. I think it's still a bit outside my remit, but I will certainly pass on that suggestion in terms of the contracts.
Mr. Chair, just one more follow-up question. Can we say what was the salary range that is now being in consideration as to did not apply or do the appropriate checks in respect to the law? Can we give what the salary range was in respect to that appointment?
Mr. Chairman, I have no idea, sir. If you ask me about civil service salaries, I can tell you. If you ask me about the salaries in the public authorities, I have no remit over the public authorities, sir.
To you.
Mr. Chair, one last follow-up question. Can the minister say what was the salary range? She's aware of the offer, so one would assume, Mr. Chair, that she would be aware of the salary range.
I think we need to remember, members of the committee, that it's the deputy governors that we are examining, and not the Minister for Financial Services.
I apologize, Mr. Chair. And I'm just asking if she's willing to offer that information as well.
Mr. Chair, I don't have that information to hand, but I'm sure that information can be provided to the members of the committee at some point during this committee.
Through you, Mr. Chair, to the Deputy Governor. My understanding is, from your statement, that the only section of the Public Authorities Law 2017 that is not currently in force is Section 47.
Mr. Chairman, that is my very best recollection. If the member would like, I can get that confirmed shortly, but the very best of my recollection is that the salary scale was the only element of the Public Authority Bill that was not put into effect.
And although that section is not in force now, part of the purpose and intention of the Public Authorities Law was not only to provide regulation of employment conditions for the chief officers, but also the further down the staff. There is provisions in the law also, I believe, where the board has to approve in similar situations as the minister would have to approve for the chief officer for minor hires, particularly like deputy directors and stuff like that. And they would be required to comply with similar provisions in the law. I.e., if they're creating, let's assume the authority for bananas is going to create they want to include bottlers as a deputy, right? In the process of establishing what the terms and conditions of employment would be for bottlers, they would have to reference that through the board, and it would be an expectation that the board would communicate with the portfolio of the civil service to make sure that the salaries and job descriptions fall in line with the standards within the civil service.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Mr. Chairman, I would generally agree with what the member is saying. Mr. Chairman, one of the things that we wanted here in the Public Authorities Bill was to make it very clear what the roles and responsibilities are of the various persons and bodies. So, for example, the board is responsible for setting general policy. The board is responsible for appointing the CEO. The CEO then appoints his staff. But, Mr. Chairman, I would believe that in a good governance model, a CEO would consult the board on making senior appointments within the organization, and also to ensure that it's within budget and acceptable, in a salary scales that have been made. So there should be a very open and transparent process in the appointment of senior positions in these SAGCs.
Because Section 44 is and 45 and 46 is in effect at the moment. And that requires that employees in the statutory authorities, companies, other entities other than the civil service, must have similar employment conditions, must subscribe to the civil service values, public must be governed by the Public Service Management Law, must be subject to the Public Servants Code of Conduct as detailed in the Public Service Management Law, et cetera, and also the benefit packages would be similar, i.e. they would be coming under cynical health insurance as opposed to going out and getting these deals with private companies, and then when they get 60 and they have an employee over 60, the private companies refuse to insure them, then they have to be insured through Seneco. So as I understood it, part of the broader purpose of the Public Authorities Law 2017 was to make sure that people in the public authorities and the other statutory companies had equal employment positions as those in the civil service, not only on salary, but also that they weren't greater than while the going was good. And when you get to the magical age of 60, then somebody else has to pick up the slack. And I must tell you, sir, that I don't know. One of the things that we don't put in laws is we don't normally assign authority and responsibility for the enforcement thereof. But the answers given earlier to the employment of a chief executive officer is troubling, because somebody needs to have the responsibility to make sure that this law is enforced and put in place. And if it is not you, then I guess the question is who?
Yeah, good point, sir. I don't know what else to say. Who?
Are there other questions? Member Free.
Mr.
It
Chair.
still comes under this vote that we're talking about now, member? Yeah, okay.
Mr. Chair, just one thing. As a freshman to this honorable house, what is the process when we have public admittance to failures to follow legislation? What happens now? For not only for me as a legislator to understand, but for the listening audience and the viewing audience to understand that when a law has not been followed, that should be followed to protect the public purse, which is the taxpayers' money, what happens now? Because I don't know, and we're not just going to go on to another vote and pretend like something didn't go wrong here. So maybe, Mr. Chair, as a sophomore to this honorable house, you can explain that process, because I don't know.
Not a civil servant like you aren't, sir. So I don't necessarily know all the answers as well in terms of where it goes. But I mean, where there are deficiencies, I would think that somewhere within the civil service, whether it's POX or the related SAGC, that there must be some efforts made to remedy the shortcomings and the shortfalls. There must be. Do you have other questions now, member from East End?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, here we are. On one hand, the statute now being followed, and we heard, on the other hand, I believe the statute being used to the extreme, i.e., during the Minister of Health time in his presentation, it was revealed that there's no CMO currently except acting. And the reason is that we had a situation where the Caymanian who was there was being turned around in circles and acting and wouldn't make them permanent. And they have now advertised, but that advertisement was done subject to POX, the portfolio of civil service, giving advice on a salary range. Because the Caymanians, it is not fair for Caymanians to be on that salary range. That was one of the problems that we were having. There are no additional criteria being applied on advice from POX. And my understanding, if this is wrong, sir, maybe you can stop me, was that they're leaving the salary at the same thing, but they're going to offer call-out allowances, and they are now requiring a 10-year experience and public health, masters in public health, which we have never had hitherto except for Dr. What's his name? Kumar. Dr. Pedley. Anyway, you'll deal with that side of it. Now, I thought at the time, Mr. Chairman, that that was somewhat of an attempt to ensure that the Caymanian who was there before didn't get it. Because the salary, if it was properly done, would show more than the chief officer. And that position is intended to be in the Ministry of Health, and that position is hitherto, the person there was always practicing as well, keeping up their practice for continuing education and the likes. But now they want to put it in the ministry as a policy director, which is how it's practiced all over the world, I believe, as a policy director to the minister. So the CMO would advise the minister. All well and good if you don't have a practicing doctor. Now, Mr. Chairman, in the past, we have always used Dr. Smith for a long time as chief medical officer. We used Dr. Kumar. We had some come in that didn't understand the landscape. We had to somehow get rid of them for whatever reason. Then we went to Dr. McLaughlin, who is a specialist in A&E or something like that. Mr. Chairman, the key is, I see you leaning forward, the key is we have never once had a problem with our chief medical officers because they understood the landscape, and those who didn't has since left for whatever reason. I wonder, why are we doing what it appears like, and I want to make sure this comes across properly. I'm not saying this deliberately, but it appears like we are trying to manipulate the system for whatever reason. I don't care who did it. This appearance. It's an appearance. Orchestrated so that the one Caymanian who currently has sufficient experience, has some experience, 3.5 years of acting, 4 years, something like that, will never be able to hold this position. How do you get the experience? Is the question. And there are other Caymanians who are very capable, and Mr. Chairman, I should tell the Deputy Governor, sir, through you, that I have consulted with quite a few doctors on this island. And they were really hoping that and I'm going to say this out, I hold no brief for nobody. I want to get that straight now. They were excited about Dr. McLaughlin staying there. And I do apologize, but if I call names, Mr. Chairman, but these are Caymanians.
Mr. Chairman, I don't even know what question I was being asked, but
I want to know what role the Deputy Governor's office played in evaluating this one, never played none the other one, and one Caymanian now legs are being cut off them.
Mr. Chairman, the answer is quite simple. One is this post is a civil service post. Yeah. It is not a SAGC post. So one of the issues that has been raised in various Auditor General's reports, and I know the leader of the opposition is quite passionate about this, was that the level of policy advice in the ministry. And that is what this job is designed to address, is policy advice in the ministry. And that's the reason why the chief officer was keen to have a highly qualified individual in that job. Now, Mr. Chairman, I want to make it very clear, because I heard what the members said. And I can tell you that the chief officer, Ms. Ahern, has kept me up to date and consulting with me on this job for quite a while now. And I want to make it very clear. There's absolutely no conspiracy or intention to not put a Caymanian in that job. But sir, this is our health. We have to get a highly qualified individual in this job. We want, and our public deserves, a world-class health service. That's what the leader of opposition took us to task down at the Public Accounts Committee about in terms of the level of policy advice, the level of skill sets that were being put to bear on this particular position. So we are keen, sir, to address that. We want the very best person. We do hope that will be a Caymanian in this role. The individual, I'm not getting into names, that the member talked about, is my understanding, was part of the committee that looked at this job description and set it up. So they knew exactly what was in the job description. We want a fantastic individual in this job to be able to deal with the healthcare systems of the Cayman Islands. What the chief officer has done is looked around the Caribbean, elsewhere. What's in that job description, in my understanding, is the industry norm. Mr. Chairman, we're saying that we want world-class health services. Well, the way to do that, sir, is to bring in the very best people to implement the government policies in relation to health. And that's what we're trying to do, sir. The chief officer, Ms. Ahern, has a proven track record. I want to make this very clear. A proven track record of giving Caymanian opportunities. She has 2 people in her ministry right now, achieving scholars, one of who she kept a job open for a year while that person went off to study, brought in another Caymanian and gave them opportunities. So I want to put this thing to rest where there is some conspiracy to keep a Caymanian out of that job. It is not true.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chairman, I do not wish to engage the Deputy Governor in the political rhetoric, but he should recognize that he mustn't open the door. Because if he pushes it, I will open it.
Thank you.
And he cannot be coming here trying to justify the abilities of someone when no one questioned it. I question him. I question his portfolio as to his part in it. Now, he has opened that door, and this is not the right place for him to do it because he certainly does not want to get into this partisan politics. But, Mr. Chairman, I would humbly and respectfully warn him to not do it. I will give him the benefit of the doubt this time, and I won't go into it. But he must not do that here, because I will take him on like I will take anyone on, any other person on, in the benefit of my people. But, Mr. Chairman, I would just like to ask him one question. Don't think he got away. Don't think you got away. You consider yourself lucky.
Thank you, sir.
He says this is our health. That is true, Mr. Chairman, and I want the best too. But the fact is that these Caymanians, including Dr. Smith, has been there for years, and we didn't have problems with it, and they were given proper advice at the time. And Dr. McLaughlin sent someone wanted. That is not right, because he has already said, we got to bring in the best. Really? I hope that wasn't a fraudulent slip.
Mr. Chair.
Members, could I just ask you to let's please try to refrain from not calling people by name.
Oh, no. I didn't start it, sir.
Miss.
I would say that across both sides of this house, let's refrain from calling people by name. Member for Northside.
Thank you, Mr. McLean.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, I want the Deputy Governor to confirm that for the first time in history, the position of Chief Medical Officer is going to be a civil service position in the Ministry of Health.
Mr. Chairman, that is correct.
Well, that is somewhat different from the evidence put before the Public Accounts Committee. in that in the answers to the Public Accounts Committee, the chief officer said, which I disagreed with in the Public Accounts Committee, that the position was going to remain at the hospital and the person was going to continue to have clinical responsibilities. Now, if it is a fact that the true position is that it is going to be a policy advisory position and it is going to be in the ministry.
Mr. Chairman, in the conversations that I've had with the chief officer, it was clear that the person would be working both places. So they would spend a lot of time in the ministry, but also, and that's why we put in the different allowances, that they would also spend some time at the hospital. But it was my understanding, and I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, if my understanding is wrong, but what this person would be primarily housed within the ministry, and that's why they fall under the civil service and not the HSA.
But therein lies the conflict, because you're setting up an administrative position of chief medical officer in the ministry, which is what it should be, to advise the minister and the chief officer on government policies relating to health care. But you're asking the person then to be employed in the HSA, working under the same policies that they put in place. Don't you see that the inherent conflict? Because who is the person going to be loyal to? Is the person going to be loyal to the HSA staff and the medical staff bylaws and the organization under the medical director? The person will then be working under the medical director at HSA. But for half of the day, there's going to be the chief medical officer who's a policy advisor to the minister over and above the medical director, because the medical director is the person that should be responsible for the quality care, etc. I would encourage the deputy governor to ensure that the position is one that is a civil servant, and two, that it remains in the ministry and we don't continue to have these conflicts, because that position of CMO goes back a long way within the HSA, and it has always been a position of conflict. Once we started recruiting a medical director as well, there were many roles that were dual, and oftentimes that of the CMO, instead of being a policy advisor, was basically deciding who goes where to get what health care. And that's not what the ministry needs. What the ministry needs is good policy advice at the policy level.
Member for...
Just, Mr. Chairman, just to say that I agree with what the member is saying, and I've made a note here to take it forward. But I agree with everything he just said, Mr. Chairman.
Member for Georgetown, then I'm going to put the matter to a vote.
Okay, Mr. Chair, I have, because we're dealing with HR matters at this particular time, right, Mr. Chair, so I think there may be a few more questions to come. Just in respect to this particular topic, through you, Mr. Chair, I'd like to say that it is quite difficult for many people, because the conversation has been going on for some time, where we have people acting for a very long time, and then we question their ability to actually do the job. If a person can act for 4 years, that means they can do the job. What's the point of having them there for that long? But anyway, let me get to my question. Through you, Mr. Chair, I had the opportunity to be presented the plans of the civil service through the deputy governor from myself and some other colleagues. And though I may know what was said, I would like for the deputy governor to give the listening audience and the public the succession plans for the fire department, the police department, and the prison, because I agree with the deputy governor that his plan is to have a Caymanian at the head of all major positions in this country. So maybe he can explain, to which I believe he has a great plan, what the plan is for getting a Caymanian at the head of each one of those departments.
But I think you state that in the form of a question to the deputy governor rather than a request for...
Yes, sir. You're correct, Mr. Chair. Through you, Mr. Chair, can the deputy governor say what the succession plan is to have a Caymanian at the head of the fire department, the police department, and the prison?
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Mr. Chairman, just to crave your indulgence for a minute, there was questions about the commencement order for the Public Authorities Bill, and I have it here if you would just, don't mind me just clearing that up.
Please do.
So it says that this order may be cited at the Public Authorities Law Commencement Order 2017, the provisions of the Public Authorities Law 2017 with the exception of Section 47 shall come into force on the first day of June 2017. Section 47 of the Public Authorities Law shall come into force on the first day of June 2018. So the information that I give the committee is correct, sir. There's only one section that is not in force at the moment.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, thank you to the member for that question, and through you, sir. Mr. Chairman, though we have, if I sit here, sir, and tell you that we have done a spectacular job in the civil service of succession planning, I wouldn't be entirely truthful. What I have seen over the last 3 years, Mr. Chairman, has been really outstanding in terms of filling almost, I would say 99% of all of the key posts that we have in the civil service. The member talked about people acting. They have all been filled. In most cases by highly competent Caymanians, many of who are in this chamber right now who have gotten promoted over the last few years. And we're very proud of that. But the member is right to raise the issue of those 3 departments, which are critical law enforcement departments. And it is certainly, it has to be our goal. I think we have an overriding responsibility to ensure that those posts are filled by Caymanians. So what are we doing? So I'll give a very high level, Mr. Chairman, and then I'll ask the chief officer to drill down a little bit. So what we're doing, Mr. Chairman, is obviously getting those posts stabilized. So the member was saying that we've had people acting in those posts for a long time. So the first thing to do, Mr. Chairman, was to advertise the post and get the post filled. And we have done that now with the Commissioner of Police and the Director of Prisons and the Chief Fire Officer. The idea now is to ensure that we have a proper succession plan in place for not just those 3 posts, but all of the major posts, all of the key posts in the civil service. Now, Mr. Speaker, as you know, Mr. Chairman, sorry, that's a mammoth task. We have 3,700 people in the civil service, but we would have a much lower number of key positions. And that's what the law requires us to do, is to identify the key positions, and obviously the positions that the member just raised are key positions across the service. So we then want to make sure that we have the plans in place. But, Mr. Chairman, the plan is one thing. The enforcement of that plan, which the members were just talking about, is the other thing. How do we actually make sure that, first of all, we identify the persons who are going to be trained up for this post, but also that it is actually happening. And, Mr. Chairman, that is what I can't give to this committee today, that kind of effort is being made. But I've identified it. We have not pushed our head in the sand and hoped that it went away. We are now putting in place really stringent plans in place to be able to achieve this. And I'll ask Ms. McField-Nixon to expand a bit about it, which is contained in our 5-year plan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In response to the member's question, as the Deputy Governor has laid out, we have been monitoring succession planning. We have a review of what we consider to be the sort of key issues facing HR within the civil service. That's done through our HR audit unit. And in terms of the importance that's put on succession planning, it is so important that it forms part of our law. It is a responsibility for a chief officer to ensure that there's succession planning within their civil service entity. We know historically that there have been 2 areas that we have been least effective in within the civil service: performance management and succession planning. And in response to that, the POCS has sought to support chief officers and the ministries and portfolios in being able to address these 2 areas of deficiency. We focused on performance management initially, and we've talked about the progress that we've had there, going from 17% just a few years ago to now in excess of 90% compliance in our performance management. There's still significant work to be done there, but the point of raising that is that part of the lessons learned is that for us to really make significant strides, we had to improve our central oversight of what was happening in those areas of deficiency. So centrally, for succession planning, what we've been looking at is what are some of the impediments that are preventing persons, and particularly in the agencies that you've mentioned, some of our uniformed agencies, in being able to take leadership roles. And part of the challenge that we found is that while persons were receiving training during their entire tenure, sometimes decades within the organization, this training tended to be focused on the technical skills of that particular agency. So for firefighters, they were kept abreast in firefighting techniques, but in order to move to the senior roles within there, they needed to have greater emphasis on management and leadership competencies. And this was something that had been regrettably lacking in many of our uniformed services. So the Civil Service College, which is a component of our portfolio of the Civil Service, has been making concerted efforts to ensure that we are reaching, particularly within our uniformed services, and inviting persons to participate in training through the Civil Service College. For the fire service, we started there, Mr. Chairman, by actually delivering the first courses on site. We went there while fire officers were on duty to make sure that the types of things that could prevent persons from being able to take part in training, that we were systematically eliminating that. A big part of the challenges to succession planning as well was that we had individuals who were in senior roles but who may not have been as supportive of persons coming up through the ranks, and certainly of their being able to participate in the training that was going to be necessary for them to be able to one day themselves hold a leadership position. So we've had to systematically push back and put in, embedded within our performance management, a requirement that you identify training for the current job, but also for the future job that you anticipate this individual might be able to participate in, that they were a valid candidate for. So we have been, training and development has been a big part of trying to tackle the issues with succession planning. We've had resource constraints as well, and a big part of that is our system capabilities. A lot of the work that has been done has been promoted by our in-house development of systems to support development. So for performance management, we have 3,700 employees, and the way that we automated that was in-house, expanding our Excel with the adequate macros that would enable us to automate the performance management system. That wasn't going to, one of the things that we've realized for succession planning is that there were starts and stops. With our mandate, we had individual departments and ministries who were completing a succession plan, but those plans could become dated the very next day due to retirement or promotion of someone, who received further qualification that made them eligible for consideration in the succession pool. So part of what we have sought, and I'm happy to say we are receiving funding for in this year's budget, 2018 budget, as well as 2019 budget, is system enhancements. Pretty much the only automated system that we have that feeds through to other systems within government is our payroll system. Otherwise, everything is developed ad hoc, either by the POCS team or by by our computer services department. So we're investing in greater capability, and in our meetings, we've talked about part of the challenges that we'd had historically during a period of austerity to make those types of investments that you would expect in an HR organization of this, of the size of the civil service. So this is a significant stride. It's part of, again, centrally supporting ministries to do what they are obligated to do in terms of succession planning. That's about the formal side of it, and we've talked about training and development and the significant strides that we've seen there. But I'd like to say that we also observe that, notwithstanding the fact that we don't have the robust plans in place, either systematically supported or even in a paper form, we're still seeing persons being promoted internally to senior positions within the civil service. And the Deputy Governor, in his address to this honorable House, has shared the many promotions, Caymanians filling senior roles, and in some cases filling positions that has historically been held by non-Caymanians. So we are making strides, notwithstanding the significant challenges. But when you look around the organization, there's still some glaring areas where we clearly still have a lot of work to do. And I'd like to just acknowledge that as recently as this past weekend, we had our uniformed services coming together to hold a job fair, ensuring that they are bringing into the civil service young Caymanians who could join their ranks. The biggest challenge I think that we're going to have is to really change the internal environment or culture within those organizations so that we're making sure that they are the types of entities that people will want to join, that people will want to stay within, and that people will want to lead. And part of the work that we're doing there is an engagement survey. So we are this week concluding across the board a civil service engagement survey that is going to give civil servants voice in explaining the types of issues that they face that may impede their ability to think long-term about careers within the civil service. Part of that is going to be speaking to whether they feel that they have a future within the civil service, that the decisions that are taken regarding their remuneration, their promotions are fair, and as well as what they are saying about the leadership that they are experiencing within the civil service. So we hope to have a much better diagnostic about the types of things that are impeding the performance and the way that people might feel engaged and feel motivated within our civil service to do many things, including continuing their education, continuing their training and development, and putting themselves forward for promotion. Another tool that we've used, although it is not as evident within our uniformed services, are secondments, the ability to be able, if you lack a particular skill set and you're not going to be able to get it in the job that you currently hold, to be able to have your job preserved for you while you move to another position where you can gain the experience that's going to be necessary to make you a viable candidate to bid for that position when it should become available. So we have been, over the years, developing the toolkit that chief officers and other appointing officers can draw upon when they're seeking to fill these roles. But we do know that there are some departments, and you've mentioned a few here today, that we need to be particularly supportive of to make sure that there is visible improvements in what's happening and that the persons who have given their entire careers to working within those areas continue to feel optimistic about their future.
Mr. Chairman, can I just beg one question? I know you want to take the vote. Just beg one.
Go right ahead.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chairman. And first of all, I want to thank the Chief Officer for that answer. It was actually quite clear. One of the things I'm curious about to the Honorable Deputy Governor, with the Public Authorities Bill now, and we have seen how some of these SAGCs are going, first of all, what would be his view in terms of changing the name from portfolio of the civil service to portfolio of the public service? Because I think it's important that the public recognizes that there is some level of governance going on. And then secondly, if he is in agreement in terms of along those lines, what legislation does he think that we would need to change to make that a reality? But I think somewhere along the line where the public is concerned, we need to improve the governance or at least to demonstrate to the public that there's some level of governance. Because we've seen ministers being held accountable for a lot of stuff in SAGCs when in fact they really don't have the authority. So we wanted to what we can do, or what does the Honorable Deputy Governor think we need to do to increase governance within the public service? Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Through you. Mr. Chairman, the law has just been passed in June, so it's early days yet. I would want to give the law a bit of a chance to sink in, to make sure that the SAGCs are trained up, ensuring what their obligations are before we take further action. In relation to the portfolio of the civil service being renamed, that is, renaming is one thing, but then asking them to carry out the mandate is the other. I mean, they are not staffed up to take on an additional 3,000 or 2,500 employees. So that would have to be looked at very, very carefully. But my advice or my recommendation right now is let's give the Public Authorities Bill a chance. Let us focus, has been raised here this morning. Let us focus on the enforcement of the bill, and after some significant training, then I think we can then take stock as to where we are with the bill, with the law. Sorry,
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a couple of questions and a couple of areas under this section to you through the Honorable Deputy Governor. I know quite a bit of discussion ensued about Chief Medical Officer, and I was listening to it with much interest. And I just wanted for the committee to be informed as to when the requirement for the 10-year public health experience was decided upon, and how was that then communicated to the HSS so that they could have an opportunity to prepare or to look within their own system for it?
Mr. Chairman, I don't have the answer to that question. I don't know when that was done. I do know that there was a committee that met to review their job description, and my understanding there was broad agreement by everyone on the committee that this was what the job spec should be, but I don't have that specific answer.
I'm willing to accept it in writing, Mr.
Sure.
Chair, and I take it that that means that this is the first time such a requirement is being expected of the CMO, based on the discussion I heard this morning.
Mr. Chairman, with your permission, I'll get both of those responses to the minister in writing.
Okay.
The other observation I had, Mr. Chair, I heard the leader of the opposition saying the deputy governor agree that perhaps it should not be a hybrid position, that it should be within the ministry. Perhaps if the deputy governor doesn't have that position paper, if you could intimate it to the committee in writing as to why it's necessary for that position to now be into the ministry when it hasn't until hither before now. Because it is a very topical position, and our constituents are expecting answers about this position, just as it was with the chief fire officer. Mm-hmm. This is a similar type position, and I think that we need to be armed with the requisite knowledge to explain whatever transpires. And I also did observe, Mr. Chairman, that I think maybe it was a member from Easton made a comment whether it was a fraudulent slip. He didn't use that nomenclature, but the effect was the same thing as to bringing them in. And I just wish to go on the record, certainly from what was discussed within our side in the caucus, that we hope that that is not a situation, that there is a Caymanian available, and if not, that very active steps are taken to ensure a Caymanian is available in short order, if not now. Sorry, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to give those responses to the minister. I do believe that information is power, and if I want you to help defend some of my decisions, then I need to give you the information to do it with. So happy to provide that information.
Yeah, through you.
I just had two other quick areas, if I could beg intelligence. One's quickly, and I had intimated privately to the Deputy Chief Officer, and I have every confidence that he'll take it in hand. But for the benefit of the coaches and the sporting staff, I had an opportunity, Mr. Chair, to meet with them, I think 2 or 3 weeks ago, and the morale with that section of over some 50-odd men and women that serve assiduously and very faithfully to our, not just our youth population, but those who are young at heart. The morale was below rock bottom, Mr. Chairman. For the first time in my political career, which now runs in excess of 20 years, I actually saw big men and women cry as they shared their experiences of what they were going on. So I would publicly once again ask the Honourable Deputy Governor to look into that situation to see where the deficit has been, because there's a huge problem, and I cannot be expected to ask them to go and tend to a youth that needs attention if their morale is so low. I've never witnessed anything like that in my professional career, Mr. Chair.
Yeah. Mr. Chairman, just through you to thank the minister for raising this with me. She did do it in private and doing so now. And I have started to put some things in place to address the concerns that she has made. So I'll ask her to leave it with me, and then I'll update her in a couple of weeks.
And the last one then, Mr. Chair, is as it relates to teachers, that all instances would have heard the proclamation I made at the Lighthouse Centre that I was persuaded, and still am persuaded, that within this 4-year tenure, a very forensic audit be given to the teachers, because it's my view that the job that they perform is hugely undervalued and that they should have a minimum wage of $5,000 per month. We have put some in the budget. Obviously, we cannot expect to get it in this financial year, but I believe we would have the support of all honorable members in this House. And I was very specific to say not less than, recognizing the barrier that gives the administrators the option to make it more than. Thank you very much for your indulgence, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, ma'am. I'm going to put it to the vote.
Mr. Chairman, just 1 minute, just if you will allow me, sir. The fact that the Minister for Education has now brought this up about the low morale. I spoke to the Deputy Governor also concerning the 360 appraisal process. And that would have identified, because it's used for middle management and higher management as a tool. And I know the Deputy Governor may be using it on some of his staff, but that's at the higher echelons. It would have identified the problem that the Minister for Education is bringing to our attention. That is precisely what it's for, so we can intervene and get something done about it in a timely manner that our staff does not go to that depth. And Mr. Chairman, I also want to say, all is not lost in the civil service. I have had good service from the civil service, from many of the members. Some don't remember, but when you remind them, like anybody else, me too. But I have had good service from the civil service. So I don't want this to get out as I'm bashing civil service. I would prefer if it be said that we stand up for Caymanians and we want to see them succeed. And by virtue of questioning and probing, it's the only way we can do that. It reminds people you never learned anything from anyone that agreed with you. It always has to be someone who has an opposing view that you learn from. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
All those in favor of pardon? I'm trying to get, we've been at this for nearly 2 hours. All those in favor of CIV1, policy advice to the head of the civil service, for $1,234,181 in 2018 and $1,184,169 in 2019, standing part of the schedule to the bill, please say aye.
Aye.
And those against, no. The ayes have it. CIV2, auditing compliance with human resource and internal financial policies, $1,071,696 in 2018 and $1,147,752 in 2019. Are there any questions?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Member from Northside.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, to the Deputy Governor. I wonder if the Deputy Governor would commit to have his audit compliance department find out what happened in the case with the what was discussed earlier, because we were questioning who was responsible for implementing the law. Section 56 makes it pretty clear. 661 says the chief officer in the relevant ministry or portfolio is responsible for the implementation of this law in the public authority that falls under the direction of that ministry or portfolio. 56, yeah. The cabinet may request a ministry or portfolio to undertake a review, investigation, or audit of the financial management, personnel management, or governance practices of a public authority to establish the extent of the public authority's compliance with requirements of this law. So I think it is clearly authorized for such an audit to take place, because I think the easiest way to get compliance is to have a case such as this properly audited and those people who were responsible for avoiding the law clearly identified.
Mr. Chairman, yes, sir. 56.4, reading down, also gives the government internal audit and our HR audit unit, which has now been amalgamated, that authority. And I will certainly give the men that undertaking that I will ask them to look into that.
Are there any other questions? If not, I put all those in favor of CIV 2, auditing compliance with human resource and internal financial policies, for $1,071,696 in 2018 and $1,147,752 in 2019. Standing part of the schedule to the bill, please say aye.
Aye.
And those against, no. The ayes have it. CIV 3, management of public sector reform, $1,554,697 in 2018 and $1,554,696 in 2019. Are there any questions?
Yes, sir.
Member from East End.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, no question, just a comment to the Deputy Governor, but not so much to him. I would like to thank them for inviting me to a presentation recently where I was given the opportunity to hear the kind of reforms that they're doing with the civil servants. I was properly enlightened. I had my own concerns. I had some suggestions that I threw out. I hope they gain a little traction with them, but they have to manage it. But I want to congratulate my cousin, Miss Gloria McField Nixon, and the lady Ali, Andrea Ali, for my what is Ali wife anyhow. And I'm responsible for their names. Their parents did that. I would like to congratulate them on their professionalism, their commitment to getting this thing done. I know they have an uphill battle, but I believe they are poised to get it done. They are capable of getting it done. They have the temperament. I believe most of all that is what is needed to get this thing done. And they have made some good inroads in there. I don't know how much bush is left in front of them, but there are times when they will feel discouraged. But I would encourage them to continue one chip per day on the stone turns it into a sculpture. And I encourage them to continue and congratulate them both. And the Deputy Governor too, somewhat.
All right, there you go.
Are there any other questions? Member for Bodentown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I also want to echo the member from East End comments. I haven't been briefed and know what is in the pipeline. The only question after the Honorable Deputy Governor is, seeing that it is only an increase of $713,000 year on year, realistically, do they think that is enough money? Because from what they have planned and some of the stuff I think is very good, especially in terms of succession planning and everything else, in terms of the reforms that's needed, I think actually more money should be voted for this. But I know we can't increase it in Finance Committee, but I think somewhere along the line, we need to find a way to support the Deputy Governor and get more funds for the public sector reform, because it is needed. So that's more my comment, or rather, what does the Deputy Governor believe in terms of a question that we can do to probably get him more money, or what we can do to help him in terms of the public service reform?
Mr. Chairman,
do you have any comment?
Mr. Chairman, through you, and first of all, just to thank the member for East End for his very kind words. I must, yes, no, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Chairman, I want to put it on record as well that we have always been enlightened by his feedback. 2 years ago, he talked to us about 360 degrees. It's something he's very passionate about. That is alive and well in the civil service now at the very top level. We're drilling that down now to heads of departments next year. So I want him to know that we have certainly taken on board a lot of what he has, and other members have said. Mr. Chairman, debate on these issues, which we all share, is healthy. And I think that we want to do our best to, at some point, silence our critics. I don't think I'll ever silence the gentleman from East End, but we're going to keep working on it, sir. Sir, in relation to the support for the civil service, the government has done a very good job, sir, of supporting us in the work that we're doing. It's really a big team effort, and I want to record my thanks to the government for the increase in funding. We'll be able to bring on some persons to be able to champion some of these areas. If you ask me why we have not done as well in, for example, succession planning and other areas, it's because we don't have an individual champion that makes sure these things happen all the time. Everyone, chief officers, myself, all of those persons, heads of departments, are so busy running their ministries and departments. Not everyone has an opportunity to focus on some of these issues. And Ms. McField-Nixon talked about centrally supporting our HODs with their succession planning. This budget is going to allow us to do a much better job with that. That is something that we're all very keen about. The government was keen to support it, and I want to just record my thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, could I just make a quick observation, dovetailing, and I couldn't resist this comment back to my good friend from Newlands, Savannah, I'm not quite sure. Bontown West. He asked about the sufficiency of the vote and the support of the government under CIV 7 and CIV 3. And I think that the Honourable Deputy Governor, in his usual responsible fiscal and austerity measures, reflects that in what is recorded in financial year 2019. In fact, he is saving $1 from what we gave him in 2018.
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to give the Honourable Deputy Governor an opportunity to brag a little bit here, but there was a really nice initiative that I was involved in, a brilliant initiative actually, called the Civil Service Reimagine. That started a little while ago. How does that effort roll up into this 5-year strategic plan? Right. And what do I expect then to see my civil service looking like in 5 years?
Good, sir. So that's an excellent question. Excellent question. Sir, our Civil Service Reimagine campaign, I asked the Strategic Reforms Implementation Unit, Dr. Tasha and Ms. Rodriguez, first of all, to look at how we have never had a strategic plan for the entire civil service. We have been sort of working in silos, and various ministries had the strategic plans, but we didn't have one to encompass the entire civil service. So that was my vision in terms of having a strategic plan for the civil service. And the Reimagine campaign was about getting all our civil service together, our elected leaders, the public, all of the key stakeholders, together to say, when we are at our best in the civil service, what does that look like? So rather than focusing on our weaknesses, we focused on our strength. So what we said was that when we are at our best in customer service, the civil servant is well taken care of, because we can't ask our civil servants to deliver exceptional customer service when they don't feel like they're being valued by the organization, or they can't, buy lunch, right? So those are our key things. They are highly trained. They are given opportunities for professional development, and that is to do with being a great fireman, but also being a good supervisor, both. Like the chief officer said, over the years, we've done a really good job of training people to be good technocrats, but we have never trained them or put a lot of emphasis on training them to be good managers and good leaders. So changing that as well. And to make sure that they are informed we can't ask our civil servants to advise the public if we haven't told them what we're supposed to be, what are the new changes, the new rules, and all those things. So just to give customer service a bit of a plug here is that what you can expect, member, from the civil service is that when we do, so we took all of that information and that's now formed and is now part of our strategic plan. So when you read the strategic plan, which we'll launch in January, you should see a lot of familiar things in there about what came out of our Civil Service Reimagine campaign. Our vision is to be a world-class civil service. Now, as I said in my speech, that is a lofty vision. But we believe that our people deserve it. You deserve it, and the members in this chamber, you deserve the civil service to be giving you professional advice, to be giving you the laws, the policies, the procedures for you to carry out your duties and your responsibilities. And certainly the civil servants need it and deserve it as an employer, that we are taking care of our people, that Caymanians are getting the very best opportunities in their civil service, that people are being trained, and we are being innovative. So all of those things are now captured in our strategic plan. We've put a lot of emphasis on communication, on leadership, on customer service, on governance, and of course, talent development. Those are the key areas that we're going to be focusing on going forward. And I can't, the Strategic Reforms Implementation Unit, Ms. Rodriguez and Dr. Tasha, really got the ball rolling. Ms. Gloria McField-Nixon and her team at the Portfolio Civil Service have now refined that and has developed a really dynamic document that I think we all can be really proud of. And I want to go on record in thanking everyone involved in this plan. It has been a really great team effort. Everyone came together. I thank the member for coming and being part of the whole exercise. It has been a really learning experience for me, but a very enlightening one to see everyone coming together. Because, sir, all of what we have talked about here this morning, I think we're all in agreement with. We want to see our people move up the ladder. We want to see our people get the very best jobs. We want to have a world-class civil service. We want to ensure that our teachers are paid and that all civil servants are paid correctly. Because, sir, as the Minister of Education is saying, if our teachers are not inspired, if our teachers know that they're not being taken care of, it's going to be hard to deliver that lesson that day. So we all want the same thing, sir. And I'm very glad that we have the kind of engagement that we have here, everyone working together for the same thing. And I want to express my sincere thanks to everyone.
Thank you very much, sir.
Mr. Chair? Mr. Chair?
Yes, member from Georgetown.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to the Deputy Governor, I think that all civil servants should give them, be happy today to give themselves a pat on the back based on your leadership. So I'll congratulate you in respect to that. I'm not sure if this is an appropriate line item to ask this question, but I'll ask it and then you can tell me if so or not. The Ombudsman's Office, the whole plan behind that was to some cost savings as some practicalities for it to all be under one head. Based on the transition now to where it's at, do you see the positives that you had hoped for being realized?
Mr. Chairman, through you, Mr. Chairman, the Ombudsman has just been in office now for a few months, or maybe even 2 months, I think. So I haven't felt it as yet, but as you know, this is one of the oversight body that sort of helps regulate the civil service to make sure that issues of maladministration, FOI, and for the first time ever, police complaints are going to be dealt with independently. So to answer your question, sir, it's early days yet. I know she is still recruiting some of her staff, getting the office staffed up, getting all the policies and procedures rolled out. But at some point, I will feel it, but not yet.
All those in favor of CIV 3, Management of Public Sector Reform for $1,554,697 in 2018 and $1,554,696 in 2019, standing part of the schedule to the bill, please say aye.
Aye.
And those against, no. The ayes have it. CIV 7, Workforce Development within the Civil Service, $564,191 in 2018, $564,191 in 2019. Are there any questions?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Member from Northside.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, I wonder if the Deputy Governor can give an update on government getting priority for scholarships for government-specific manpower needs. A couple of years ago, when I graduated from high school, and you went to apply for a scholarship, the government had a list of things that it needed. And if you wanted a government scholarship, you had to choose one of those. One of the things that's happening now is that we're giving scholarships for all kinds of things, and not often enough, very rarely do I see anybody getting a government scholarship to do public administration, for instance. And I'm wondering if there's any consideration of giving the specific manpower needs for specific positions in government some priority on government funds and of scholarships.
Good morning, sir. Mr. Chairman, we have some good news in this area. I will ask the head of the Civil Service College to maybe give us an update as to what's happening there. But, sir, more and more, I'm seeing young Caymanians with public administration qualifications coming in to the service. I'm very pleased to say that we have one fantastic young lady working with us now in the reforms unit, along with Ms. Rodriguez and Dr. Tasha, an outstanding young Caymanian who is, I think, has a very bright future in the civil service. But I will ask Ms. Andrea Famoy, who is the head of the Civil Service College, to talk to us about it. And we can also do some further work with the Minister of Education. I know she shares that same passion in terms of public administration.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. My name is Andrea Fa'amoy. I'm head of the Civil Service College. Regarding the question posed, I'm sorry, was it specific to bachelor's degrees or just general studies in public admin? Well, the Civil Service College, I'll tell you, just in terms of public administration, we offer a variety of courses or a variety of certifications. Through our partnership with UCCI, we offer a certificate program in public administration as well as an associate's degree in public administration. Those two programs of study are available to all civil servants. But in relation to Caymanian civil servants, we've taken it a step farther in the last couple of years, whereby we offer support at a bachelor's level for Caymanian honors graduates of our Civil Service College associate's degree. While the bachelor's level study is not specific to public administration, seeing as how they are civil servants, they would have achieved an associate's degree at the least in public administration. And the civil service not only requires individuals with advanced study in public administration, but rather across many different fields of study. We allow them to to follow their passion as long as it can be of service to the civil service in its entirety.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, I agree with all that and I support all of that, but what I was looking for is to whether government is making any specific effort to recruiting some of the top high school graduates, the people that are coming out with 12, 13, 14, O-level, all distinctions, and having them trained for specific positions in government that are maybe currently filled by an expat because we don't have any Caymanian that's qualified.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, thank you, and thank the member for that question. Mr. Chairman, this was flagged to us again a couple of years ago in the regular meetings that we have, and we have then gone out and made a concerted effort to try to attract some of our top students. So we have really upped the game in our internships, our summer internships. We've gone from having 30 or 40 to over 100 interns, bringing them into the civil service, working them in all of the various ministries and portfolios. That has gone exceptionally well. While they're with us, we then try to have a some training sessions so that they understand how the entire government system works and what opportunities there are for them in the civil service. And Mr. Chairman, that is something that's very near and dear to me. That's how I started in the civil service as an intern. Somebody from immigration came to my school and said that there were jobs available, and I thought maybe that was a nice job, and I went and worked at immigration. The rest is history. So that is something that I am very passionate about, and I get great support from the government, from chief officers, everyone, in terms of funding for this really great program. Also, to go at the very top students, just 2 years ago, we've introduced the Deputy Governor's Award at the graduation for John Gray and Clifton Hunter, and I know the Minister for Education is going to want me to do the same thing for the BRAC, so I'm going to have to do that as well, to ensure we give that award for one of the top students, and the prize, in addition to a monetary prize, is a guaranteed paid internship in the civil service for 2 years. And I'm pleased to say now that I think this year we'll have our first candidate actually take up the post. I think a young lady that graduated with 14 O-levels. So those are the kind of people that we want to target, and I think we're on our way. It's going to take us a while to get there, but I do believe that we're well on our way.
All those in favor of CIV 7, Workforce Development within the Civil Service, for $564,191 in 2018 and $564,191 in 2019, standing part of the schedule to the bill, please say aye.
Aye.
And those against, no. The ayes have it. CIV 8, Human Resources and Accounting. Right down to 12? So 8 through 11. Okay. Well, I will put the question. All those in favor of CIV 8, Human Resources and Accounting Services, for $1,084,241 in 2018 and $1,062,000 in $1,062,996 in 2019, and CIV 10, Servicing of the Legislative Assembly and Members of the Legislative Assembly, for $1,268,308 and $1 million in 2018, and $327,268 in 2019. CIV 11, Servicing and Support for Her Excellency the Governor, $664,974 in 2018.
Mr. Chair.
And $664,000.
Just a scrivener's error. I think we need to change the gender in CIV 11 from Her Excellency to His Excellency, seeing that we're talking about 2018, 2019.
Well, in fairness, Her Excellency will be here for a couple months in 2018, so we effectively need to amend it to Her Excellency. We can make the amendment. Yes. So I will conclude and still put the vote. I finished with 2018 and $664,973 in 2019. All standing part of the schedule to the bill, please say aye.
Aye.
And those against, no. The ayes have it. CIV 12, Preservation and Management of Records, $1,121,353 in 2018 and $1,121,353 in 2019. Are there any questions?
Yes, sir.
Member from East End.
Mr. Chairman, I just need to find out from the governor, deputy governor, when it is that we are going to see the proper preservation of our historical existence, should I say. I believe that there was a time, the Premier may be able to help me with this, when we were asking for a secured location, someplace where storm, well, the ravages of storm mightn't have been as bad, and microfilm as well. From time we had it we had all the records in the town hall, it was, after Hurricane Ivan, that we were asking for microfilm. I don't know where that has gone at this stage, because it's so difficult for the preservation. We don't preserve our existence, which is for future generations.
Mr. Chairman, with your permission, I would like to ask the Director of the National Archives to come and give us an update. They've been doing some really great work over the archives.
Good morning. Josette Lawrence, Director, National Archive. Mr. Chairman, through you, we continue with the microfilming program. We continue with scanning to make records readily available. So that is an ongoing process, and we've been trying to expand it. Apart from having a new building, that is pretty much all that we can do at this stage, is look at ways as how we can scan or microfilm.
Mr. Chairman, I know I go there once a year. They take all kind of money from me. Mr. Chairman, I wonder if the Deputy Governor can commit to us to push for us to do something about this. Because every time it rains, and I go there quite often when it's raining at the archive, I'm not going to step in water, and they're driving in water. That's no way for us to preserve our past. And that was oversimplifying it, I must say. But certainly, if we can push for this, promote it, and it may not be today, but it needs to be done. It really needs to be done. Isolated building someplace where it's can properly be filed and it's easily accessed, and the government records as well should be in that building. The ones that 3 years or 2 years, 5 years or whatever, people can drive to it. You know, it really needs to be done. I mean, I recall the day I came in here. Dr. Frank used his pen to sign the register. That pen, I'm sure, run out of ink, long time gone thrown away. You know, but it was the significance of it, of what transpired that day, over that week, in the political arena. And those are the things we need to keep the paraphernalia from politics. You know, it's piled up in these people's office, waiting to be microfilm and stuff like that. All that kind of stuff needs to be in a dedicated building where we have staff there who can pull these files, have them ready for people to come upon request, but at the same time preserving these things as well. And Mr. Chairman, I just want him to push for it, promote it, whatever the case may be. But we need more archives from where it's at, because that's in the middle of a swamp, and water is going in it every time it rains.
Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to discuss with the chief officer and the director here about the building, and then obviously put up a request to our political leaders over the next 2 years then for building. Exactly.
All those in favor of CIV 12? Preservation and management of records for $1,121,353 in 2018 and $1,121,353 in 2019. Standing part of the schedule to the bill, please say aye.
Aye.
And those against, no. The ayes have it. Maintenance, CIV 13, maintenance of the electoral register, $407,321 in 2018 and $407,821 in 2019. Are there any questions?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Member from Town West.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through you, sir, to the Honorable Deputy Governor. Seeing now that many employers are considering or asking Caymanians for proof of Caymanian citizenship, for lack of finding a better word at this time, and that the voter ID is one of the best ways to prove that someone is Caymanian, where jobs and everything is concerned, would the government consider having the office operate more monthly rather than quarterly, especially with a lot of young kids coming out of school? And rather than having going through the process of proving that they're Caymanian, this would be a good time in which to start a voter drive to say, well, once you have this ID, it is proof that you are Caymanian, because that's the only way you can vote.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I will ask the Supervisor of Elections to answer that question, sir.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Wesley Howell, Supervisor of Elections. Mr. Chairman, that's an excellent question. Typically in non-election periods, Mr. Chairman, the registration on the voters list actually goes down. I reviewed the numbers last week in preparation for this meeting, and compared to where it was in the list that was used for the May election, we're actually up by 1, which doesn't seem like a whole lot, but usually what we do for certain is take off persons who are deceased and persons who have been incarcerated. So the list actually declines normally over this period of time. So the fact that it's up by 1 is an indication that folks are actually registering even after the election has passed. The office is seeing an increase in persons requesting the voter ID. As the member from Town West stated, it is a 3-month process in terms of the law as it now stands for publication of the revised list. The period for that to be displayed, and then the official list comes in to official capacity once it's signed off by the magistrate. But folks have been coming in for the voter ID for know your customer purposes with financial institutions, and otherwise for proof that they are Caymanian. We've seen that even for Caymanian students going to school.
Mr. Chair.
Member from Town.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, I would like the Deputy Governor to assist me with some information in terms of the postal ballots. I think everybody in here probably lost votes by this system not working the way it was designed or hoped. I probably lost about 20 votes. And in Newlands, that would have made someone else win. So I'm saying, what is are you looking at a new process in terms of managing these postal ballots, and what is it, or if anything has been determined?
Mr. Chairman, thank you again. Mr. Chairman, in relation to the postal ballots, in the 2016 amendment, the postal ballot system was modified in terms of not requiring a registered mail to be sent. The advice from the postal system is that registered mail, particularly in the U.S., is one of the slowest mechanisms to send mail. So instead of days, it's weeks, if not months. The law was then amended so that we could send express mail system service from the post office. In some cases, it worked really well. Folks were able to receive their postal ballots within days. In other cases, it was weeks before they received it on their end, and in some cases, those didn't make it back to us. Mr. Chairman, the recommendation that we'll make going forward in terms of legislative changes is to, particularly for those countries that we know the express mail service, which is a post office service in multiple countries, didn't pan out during the 2013 is to switch to commercial courier. Now that will come at an additional expense, but it would ensure that the postal ballots can make it out and back in time. The other point, Mr. Chairman, is that because of the change in the elections law in terms of the qualifications to candidates, in some cases we actually delayed the printing of the ballot papers pending the outcome of the judicial hearings on candidate qualifications. So that affected the delay between ballots being printed and being able to be sent out.
Member Freestone.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, Mr. Mr. Howell seems to have gotten his finger on some of it, but I believe there is more too. That our election law needs serious reform for those little operational things. I spoke about it in my debate about voters registration. The Caymanian get on there, they don't come off. Whether they live in Timbuktu or Russia, I don't care. And those are the things that needs to be done. Caymanian qualifications, 400 days, all that kind of rubbish needs to be taken out. But we need to go to the Constitution too, I know, to do that. However, Mr. Chairman, I want to know if the electoral election office are making any recommendations short order, because every time we come here 5 terms now, and they come not even in the evening, right at 12 o'clock, they bring these amendments and there's no time to implement them. We always do that. I implore them to, whatever recommendations, we need to bring them to the cabinet ASAP. And there are many. I think we should also do what we did in 2005, I believe it was. Have a consultation with all members and find out what their concerns are, because everybody has a different experience in this thing. And then we can amalgamate them, dovetail them, and somehow bring some amendments to this election law. I'm asking if they're going considering that, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, thank you, and through you, sir. Mr. Chairman, if I may refer briefly to the final observer mission report. These are the international observers. They actually had a recommendation. But you, the member might agree with this particular one. The last amendment, the 2016 amendment to the elections law, was passed about 6 months before the election, and they thought that was outside of the international norms, which stated that the election law should be passed at least 12 months before, no changes after 12 months before the election. So it is my undertaking, Mr. Chairman, to present Her Excellency the Governor, to whom I report for election matters, with a report of recommended changes, and then carry that forward with the DG's assistance through to Cabinet, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to thank him, but there are certain part of that report. Tell him that we will not be accepting no recommendation about people on work permit voting here.
Mr. Chair.
I put the question.
Mr. Chair.
Chairman. Okay. Oh, sorry, member for Georgetown Central.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, can the Deputy Governor say if there will be any voter registration drives throughout the 4-year period that would encourage people to get registered outside of just them knowing it on their own? Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chairman, through you again. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to thank the member for that question. If we look regionally and international, Mr. Chairman, the number of uncertainty in the political system is high. So one of the things that we've included in the upcoming budget for 18-19 is ongoing training for our elections workers so that they maintain a state of readiness in the event that we have a by-election. The other thing that we have is some more public education about the systems of voter registration and the electoral system in the Cayman Islands.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Just one more follow-up, because I don't think, Mr. Chair, that I heard an answer to my colleague from Bontown West in respect to whether the voter's ID can be the solution to much of the Caymanian or concern of whether a person is Caymanian or not that was raised in this committee last evening. If the Deputy Governor's office is keen to try to push that to be the resolve, because we've heard conversations about a national ID and the like from employment purposes perspective. Is there an intent by the elections office to try to use the voter's ID to solve this problem? Or is that an idea, a thought, anybody, discussions about it?
Mr. Chairman, through you. Mr. Chairman, as Supervisor of Elections, I actually sit on an e-government committee which is actively working on a national ID system. And yes, Mr. Chairman, the verification process that goes into vetting a voter to become a registered voter is one of the mechanisms for which persons can sort of get an assurance that they are Cayman and can then be issued an ID as to that effect. For persons who are already elected, already registered electors, they can pick up their voter ID card if they don't already have that, and that can prove that they are Caymanians, because of course, as it is now, only Caymanians are allowed to be registered to be electors as per the Constitution.
Mr.
All those
Chairman.
in favor? Oh, sorry. Go ahead, sir.
Waiting patiently, sir. Just a quick sort of a follow-up as well on the updating of the electoral list, because now that we have single-member constituencies, smaller number of voters per constituency, I think it's going to be critical that we maintain those and keep them as accurate as possible. I'm already aware of a few people who may have left Newlands at this point in time, some who have moved in. I understand it's the responsibility of the voter to try to make sure that their information is up to date. However, is there going to be an ongoing campaign to make sure that we keep those lists as accurate as possible?
Mr. Chairman, thank you for that. Mr. Chairman, yes, sir, that is the intention of the Elections Office. The door-to-door exercise, while it was fairly effective, what we realized that starting in one end of the island and both ends of the islands, actually, East End and West Bay, and North Side about the same time, by the time we got to Georgetown, we were actually seeing people who were already found in another district who have moved within the period of time that the survey was on. And the ESO team, whose methodology we use, said that it's actually pretty normal for folks to be very mobile. So our intent, Mr. Chairman, is to continue the registration process. There was an amendment in the 2016 elections law that seeks to simplify the production of the voters register changes. So for 3 of the electoral registers per year, we will soon be publishing only the Delta changes. So these are people that were added, removed, or changed their information. The idea there is that even though the electoral districts are smaller, persons could then clearly see persons who have been registered in their electoral district and persons who have left their electoral districts. With the public publication of that, then we hope to have more feedback as to how accurate that is. But that is something that we're aware of and trying to work towards, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chair.
Member for
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you. I just want to say that on the card itself, it should say that you are Caymanian on the card itself. And further to what I mentioned earlier, I actually sat down inside on election on the process in trying to confirm the voters list, and saw Caymanians with tears in their eyes who had flew back home and were refused the opportunity to vote, who wanted to vote. This was a few of them. So I just want to say that we need to make some amendment there to ensure that any Caymanian that wants to vote is allowed to. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, just to follow up on that, can the through you, Mr. Chair, can the deputy governor say whether or not there's been any indication from the current administration to make the necessary changes that allow Caymanians to vote who are overseas regardless of the length of time away, like other jurisdictions do? Like some other jurisdictions. Thank you, Premier.
Mr. Chairman, the qualifications for electors and also for candidates are enshrined in the Constitution. So any amendment to the number of days away for qualifications or lack thereof would require a constitutional change there.
Are there any other questions? All those in favor of CIV 13, maintenance of the electoral register, $407,321 in 2018, $407,821 in 2019. Standing part of the schedule to the bill, please say aye.
Aye.
And those against, no. The ayes have it. Members of the committee, it's a convenient time for us to take the lunch break. It is now 25 minutes to 1. Let's be back. We'll reconvene at 1:30.